Paladins developers have announced a Season 1 is coming for Paladins, bringing big changes and additions in one big package. We've also had some other leaks from data miners looking at Paladins files on the new character Tyra, who is now confirmed to be a damage dealer, and that too was announced in this dev Q&A between Drybear, the lead developer, and Hara's Pretty Hair, another dev member. The link to that will be in the description below, and that is pretty much an hour long, so if you've got time to sit through that, then you can go do that. But I'm going to be looking at what they've said and some of the ideas and things that are coming through. Basically, there have been some, well, leaks, I guess, of basically data miners have got some files from the newest patch, and we're able to see some of the abilities and things that weren't yet unlocked in the game but exist in the game files for Tyra, the new champion. So I'll be going over those, but they're always going to be prone to change and maybe completely off or something they were just trying out, so bear that in mind. Anyway, first of all, let's have a look at Season 1, and this is basically a rather large overhaul and revamp. First of all, they're looking at the items, looking at Cauterize, Aggression, Wrecker, and their current high impact, and they also mentioned looking at Wrecker's effect on tanks' total health, so Ruckus being the one most impacted at the moment, but in general they were hinting heavily at looking at how the item system was working, and making sure that the items made sense within the meta that has been emerging in the game. Two more champions were also teased, and both of these are frontliners, and the one that was elaborated on a bit more was the one that steals shields and puts shields on people, and it sounds a lot like a male character as they did refer to it as a he. So sorry, female frontline cheerleaders, although bear in mind that might just be an accident on the stream, as it's easy to assign a gender without thinking, so who knows. Anyway, the other one isn't announced yet, so perhaps that one is a lady, but we'll just have to see. Going back to the shield champion, the new HUD, those bars that you see with the yellow shifting bar, is in preparation for that champion, so that it makes sense visually. And they did say that they were still working on it, and actually in Reddit today, one of the developers responded to a thread that was saying that the health bars suck, which they do at the moment because it's so easy to not see your health going down in the corner of your eye. Before, you had basically in your peripheral vision, eventually your health would go to red, and then you knew that you were in trouble, but not anymore. And it's just so easy to take some damage and not know about it and die, and not being able to react is the big thing, because that's so frustrating. But the developer did say that they were working on both, looking at the visual feedback from the bar, basically because they've reworked it, so they need to work on it a bit more, and also about the feedback on when you're getting hit by things. And these are both, he said, were going to come in the next patch, so OB40. They also teased a card revamp, although the details were limited. They did suggest wanting to perhaps enable certain playstyles, so we might see more cards like Eevee's Wormhole, which brings a completely new mechanic into the champions, and maybe something that really shakes up the meta and how we play each champion and gives us different ways to play them, more than just those little specializations we have at the moment. They did talk about bringing Drogo's mobility into a card perhaps, but they also talked about the fact that they can now control the velocity on the fly, and that's the same with bonking, and they did concede that there was a lot of negative feedback about Drogo, saying that they were looking at him, and also they were looking at Bomb King now. So let's make ourselves loud and clear that both of these champions don't feel quite right at the moment, especially Bomb King without his escape. He's kind of useless, he's just so squishy and so big. He's had a massive nerf when he wasn't even the top bomb in the meta anyway. Drogo was pretty good in the meta, but at the same time they nerfed sort of the fun element, and I do want some of that velocity brought back in again. But they also have shown us, as I've said, that they're wanting to bring more stuff into the cards, that it might be this was all done in preparation for some changes to the cards in Season 1. Also, their arguments weren't unreasonable, that they were basically using exploits to get around the map and things like that. And they wanted to make it a tighter mechanic, but they need to bring something else in to compensate for what they've taken away, because at the moment they just don't feel right, the mobility just isn't there. They did also tease on a Grok ult that might heal himself finally, and generally into the meta mix-up for the new season and all the other champions at the same time. They've also talked about map design being looked at, because there are 3 maps listed on the data mine that I've also talked about before. Obviously these are subject to change, but they did mention those in the QA as well. And they've also talked on the Q&A about making the maps maybe shorter or getting rid of so many choke points and making them a bit more fluid. So they were talking specifically about ice mines and frozen guards as the maps that they didn't feel quite worked as they intended. So we might see more changes to those when the new Season 1 comes out. They didn't mention a matchmaking rework or a complete reset to ranks in the MMR, but if they are going for the new season approach, we may very well see a reset on the ranks, and maybe this will happen every so often. And perhaps this is why matchmaking, especially character ranking, has stayed like it is for so long, with the massive drops and small gains, especially at the start when you first are playing them. This is all completely just speculation though, but perhaps Season 1 will see the rework or tweaking of the ELO system and its presentation, and maybe we'll get something new. Maybe that would make sense as to why it's been left in sort of the messy state it is at the moment. In short, actually, I think a lot of the mess in the meta problems at the moment might make more sense into relation to this sort of Season 1 big change that they're trying to bring in. But at the same time, I do feel that at the moment, things don't feel amazing, and this is after playing a full day of competitive yesterday on champions that did see some nerfs and changes, especially Bomb King and Drogos, and not really feeling in a place where they should be. As they have said though, after the holidays, in quotation marks, is where they're trying to get Season 1 out for, so probably won't see it at least until January, and likely the announcement will be made at the Hi-Rez Expo on January the 5th. And we'll get more information then. So what does everyone think about this Season 1 and what it might bring and mean to the game? Maybe even really rattling up the meta and changing a lot about the game. Be sure to let me know in the comment section below, and let's talk about Tyra now. So Tyra is pretty much confirmed at this point. Maybe the name's wrong, but everything is pointing towards this, and even the data mining lined up with the fact that Dry Bear, well, he actually started to whisper and cover his mic, but he said that the champion was another damage dealer, and also he whispered, or his mic sort of turned off, and said that it has an assault rifle, which is exactly what came out in those leaks that came out a few days beforehand. I mean, another assault rifle champion, you might think, oh, that doesn't sound very exciting. Victor's kind of a boring character, but there's quite a few things that are interesting about her kit. Tyra was talked about as a champion that has area control more than any other champion, and also new ways to deal with flankers or stealth characters in the game, and that was between Dry Bear in that Q&A. And obviously the data mining stuff hasn't been confirmed, but they did get the battle rifle right, so bear all of this in mind, as this is all a work in progress, or might be not present at all, or maybe completely cut, so we won't know until it's properly teased. But for now, let's just assume it's like Tyra Banks, that she's a she, and as mentioned, she has an assault rifle as a primary weapon, and with the cards I'm going to mention shortly, it suggests that it has low damage, but has interesting properties that I'll come to in a minute when I talk about the cards. There is a hyper beam listed, but there aren't any hints as to whether this is an escape, or if it was an old primary weapon concept, or part of her abilities, or something else, or maybe even the ultimate, but it just doesn't specify, it's just listed as hyper beam, and that's it. There is Firebomb though, or Molotov as it's listed, and it's an incendiary device that leaves a pool of fire and burns enemies for 3% of their max health every 0.2 seconds for 6 seconds. So it's a bit like Maldamba's Gourd, but instead of doing half damage and half healing at the same time, it's just full on damage and just really wrecking champions that are stuck inside it. Some things that are really interesting about this ability is that, first off, its percentage based damage basically works best against frontliners, as they have the biggest health pools, so this would definitely push them off a point hold. And interestingly, actually, the devs mentioned about Skye having the poison bolts and how they were really effective against frontliners, and they were thinking about buffing her against frontliners, and maybe this was because they were thinking about Tyra in the back of their heads and how they are pretty good against frontliners on a point, and basically moving people off of a point hold, or like a death ball and a point with 2 tanks and a healer, as they won't be able to stay in that one spot without taking massive damage because of their massive health pools, and each tick will be 3% of whatever the massive health pool they have. It also could be dropped where a Charlene is ulting or Skye has smoke to flush them out, and this might have been where they were talking about dealing with the flankers and the characters that were able to go invisible, but I don't know whether it'll be that effective against those characters, and against flankers I'm not sure, unless there's some more properties that come along with it. And further down actually in the cards it mentions about a healing reduction and being able to increase that, so we can also assume there's healing reduction on that Firebomb as well, which makes it sound really rather powerful. A grenade launcher is also listed, but how much damage, how big of an area, and how it all works is very foggy, but it does have a cooldown to use, so likely is an underbarrel one that you use for some extra damage and is something that you use occasionally. Maybe it'll work a bit like Victor's grenade, to be honest, just giving you that extra damage, and also making you a bit of a anti-Haven and anti-blast shields, being able to have both types of damage. Then we have Hunter's Mark, which seems to place a bounty on an enemy player, and with cards can give you returned health, and has buff cards whilst active, and I'm uncertain whether you'll mark an enemy player or it will pick one randomly out for you, but it does sound like a very interesting concept, something a bit like Bounty Hunter's track in Dota 2 if you play it. At this point, I'm really unsure about the ultimate, it doesn't specify anything, and maybe again that was the Hyper Beam, but let's move on to the cards. So first off, the weapon cards. The first listed is Shieldbreaker, and this one's one of the really interesting ones. Basically, it makes your weapon shots do reduced damage reduction for 30% for 2 seconds. So basically it'll reduce the effects of Haven or Blast Shields on your targets, perhaps making Haven and Blast Shields less of the meta in games against Tyra, but maybe also suggesting Tyra's Assault Rifle doesn't do a lot of damage alone, and maybe it's just all about the reduction and all the other abilities she has. Locked and Loaded is pretty standardly increasing the ammo count. There's the armor cards, which are also quite standard. The first one gives eliminations, reducing active cooldowns, increasing maximum health, and reducing slow effects up to 50%, so fairly basic. One interesting one is the Firebomb cards, and Incense gives movement speed after activating Firebomb, which could be used to chase enemies once they are flushed out of hiding at a guess. And then we have Napalm, which reduces healing by 5, 10, 15% or 20% more, which under the Firebomb ability. Healing reduction again wasn't specified, but perhaps it will have a lower base, or even with this card will give it reduction depending on balancing. Salamander reduces self-damage taken from the Firebomb up to 80%, so firstly, interestingly, this Firebomb will hurt you, so you can't just stand in the middle willy-nilly, but you also have a way to get into that firestorm you're dropping down for yourself, and engage enemies close up with this card. Then there's Volatile, which reduces a cooldown for up to 4 seconds, which suggests it probably has quite a hefty cooldown. And then onto the Grenade Launcher. Bandolier gives a cooldown reduction of up to 2 seconds, so perhaps this one doesn't have a long cooldown in the first place, so you'll be able to fire the Grenade Launcher off pretty regularly, I would guess. Quick Heal gives up to 40% reload speed for 3 seconds after using the Grenade Launcher, just pretty standard. And Turn the Tables heals you for 200 after hitting an enemy with the launcher, which might be quite useful. And then we've got the Hunter's Mark cards. One big one is Hunting Season, which heals up to 800 health if you kill somebody with Hunter's Mark. And this basically is as good as the last level of Kill to Heal, which heals 900 of your health. And this could be the big meta for the character and one of the cards that you use a lot, depending on how big the cooldown for Hunter's Mark is and how useful it actually works in the game. There's also Favorite Quarry, which reveals up for 4 seconds longer with Hunter's Mark, and this could be big at hitting a flanker that escapes and hides, or an invisible character. And again, to mention, this suggests that Hunter's Mark actually spots the character and marks them basically like you have visibility of them the whole time. Ranger is a cooldown card up to 4 seconds, so again this one might be a long cooldown ability. There's also Tracker, which gives extra movement speed up to 20% while somebody is marked, so you can chase them down more easily, I guess. And those are all of the cards that have been revealed so far. So all in all, Tyra sounds like it might be quite an interesting character. Personally, I hope that it relies a lot more on the abilities than it does on the main weapon, so it doesn't sort of overlap with Victor so much, and the idea of these debuffs is a unique take on a damage dealer that we haven't seen yet. So I really hope that it's all about the abilities, and that the weapon is more of a debuff tool and slight damage, and it's more about chasing down, catching people in AoE, and things like that. Either way, I'm looking forward to Tyra, although again it is unfortunate that we haven't got some frontliners this time, or some support, or another flanker, as those ones that are sort of thin on their ranks. But again, they've mentioned that there are 2 frontliners in the works, and we might see them maybe in the next 2 patches, or at Season 1 whenever that comes out. So what does everyone else think about Tyra? Are you hyped for her now, or does it sound rather meh now you know that they've got an assault rifle? Be sure to let me know in the comment section below. And personally, after being quite frustrated with the current meta and how things are, it does answer some of the questions that I had, and adds more questions, I guess, as to whether they're going to fix things in the upcoming Season 1 and whether they're just waiting on that. And we are playing a beta, which you've got to remember, even though in some ways the line between beta and full game is really blurred at the moment, especially with free-to-play games, so it's always a bit of an odd place. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button. If you thought it was rubbish, give it a dislike. Subscribe for more of my content, and thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you next time. Joshino.